Primos y primas, que lo que, welcome, bienvenidos to the Dear God Are We There Yet, the podcast con tu prima favorita. Soy Alicia Sanchez, and yes, this podcast is bilingual, empowering social good one conversation at a time, sharing weekly insights and inspirations from people adding their magic to make this world a better place. Whether you want to learn more about volunteer travel, being more socially conscious, or you love a good conversation that breaks down barriers while evoking pasión and emoción, this is the podcast for you. Grab a cafecito y vamos a hablar. Primos y primas, que lo que, bienvenidos to the Dear God Are We There Yet, the podcast con tu prima favorita. Soy Alicia, and thank you for another episode. I am excited. I hope you guys are enjoying season 4. We have some amazing subjects and conversations. And, you know, last week, pretty funny because last week's topic kind of shook some people, and I got some emails and some little messages and some open-ended questions about my perspective. So if you have not checked that out, go ahead. It's on the podcast, and it's about helping people and, you know, hurting them while helping them. So check that out. But this week I want to talk about something a little bit different, and it's about the truths of our culture and, you know, trying to dig through the lies. And this conversation has been inspirado por my own culture. And when I tend to speak about La Española, Dominican Republic, or Haiti, or in different parts of North America or South America or Latin America, you know, it's always piques my attention of people's perspective or their outlook on what history is. And so bear with me this today's episode. I want to kind of say this up front, that these are my opinions and these are my takings about the subject, and I am so excited if you go ahead and email me or send me messages and tell me your perspectives, because that is what it's all about. Entonces vamos a comenzar hoy. Y por favor, muchísimas gracias para todo el mundo que siempre está escuchando el podcast. Thank you so much for everybody tuning in. 4 seasons and we're still going. And I say to myself all the time, like, people are listening to this podcast. Yes, Dominicans do podcast. Wait. Anyways, so, you know, I'm recording this, and yesterday we had Martin Luther King's birthday. And it was special in the sense it's always special, but it always makes me think about, you know, when I'm always reading the quotes or the stories or remembering, you know, the history of Martin Luther King, or even Anne Frank, which, by the way, if you guys know that if Anne Frank was alive and Martin Luther King was alive, they would have been like, what? I don't even know how old. They would have been in their 70s, perhaps. So, you know, it makes you think about history. It makes you think about the truths or the lies or the opinions or the factoids of in our cultures. And, you know, being Dominican, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of different people that are misconstrued about the history of our country and our island, La Española. And sometimes I say to myself, you know, I get disappointed that even in our educational system, they lack to give information, whether it's correct or if it's, you know, wrong. They don't even mention it. And so, you know, being inspired by Martin Luther King and his teachings and his quotes, and now being 2021, and tú sabes que ya 2020 era un toyo, un maldito toyo. That's what I want to say, okay? Pero I always say, like, where are the truths in beneath all the lies that we've been told, or all the misconceptions about our cultures? Whether you are Latina, whether you are African American, whether you are African, whether you are um, Arabic or Asian, or whatever your culture is, wherever you're from, there's always little seeds that are planted to kind of bring out what the truth would be in your culture and why we're living amongst societies and we make our decisions based on lies or based on what these lies that have been passed down to each other, and they end up being again a part of that generational curse that we all hear and talk about. And so think about it right now. I want you to think about a statement that you've ever heard about your culture. Think about your culture. Even if you're American, you're born in America, think about your culture right now. What is something that you've always questioned? Because on the podcast, yo siempre estoy hablando. I'm always talking about question everything. I'm always talking about, let's peak these conversations about, let's continue to ask questions about it. And about whatever it is that we want to know. And it's not to prove right or wrong sometimes, it's just to dig. And I think scientists do this. And I think my first episode on season four, I talked about how scientists and how they're just constantly digging for different truths. History is more than just these little factoids that I'm talking about. The complexity makes it difficult for us to learn exactly why things happened the way they did. Think of it with Black history, or African American history, Latin American history, whatever it is, there's always some things that you always question and say, but wait, did that really happen? Is this why I'm living my life based on something that's been passed down that's not a true? Or it could be an exaggerated truth, right? And then we have a choice between two perspectives. And the reason why, again, I'm having this podcast is today because, in our volunteer community, we are always amongst so many different cultures. And I'm going to tell you a quick story before we talk about, the choice between these two perspectives and finding out these lies. The minute you are judged by a way of something that you say or the way you look, it always comes from history, right? And I'm not talking about black and white issue. I'm not talking about the color of your skin. I'm talking about other issues as well, because that issue is, yes, that's been for a long time, and there's a lot of truth in that. We've all seen it, but there's cultural differences in racism in all countries and all cultures, right? But let's dig deeper into these supposedly facts that come in history. I was talking to this guy the other day, and it was actually an interview. He was interviewing me on Dear God, Are We There Yet? And we were talking about education, and we were talking about, how culture sometimes seeps into religion and how they kind of blend. And he was a Middle Eastern man, and he was saying that, the history is so aligned with their religious background that is something believable when it comes to education. And he was, trying to go to college for whatever it is his parents wanted him to do. And they kept depicting this persona based on history, based on culture, based on these factoids that I'm speaking about. And it created a sense of friction and a sense of anxiety for him. And it made him think about, like, I'm living these truths, or are these truths, or are these lies in between them? And sometimes we don't even know what we're picking out. Sometimes we don't even know if the history of Christopher Columbus or whatever the case is, we weren't there, right? We weren't. And so we have to understand, that are we living our lives based on these factoids? And so he is stressing himself out to do something aligning in his culture, where it's passed down from generation to generation, and how the history of their culture is embedded in their religious format of how, they need to get an education, because if you don't, then you're going to be, I don't know, you might you might be struck down, or you're going to have bad luck forever. Have you ever heard of esa vaina? Have you ever thought about that? The things that we say to ourselves. I mean, in Hispanic culture, this happens all the time, where, don't sweep your feet or you'll never get married. And yes, these wives' tales comes from some part of history where someone told someone that these are truths. And while wives' tales might be something very surface, there are a lot of depth into it of who conquered what and why women should wear this and why should women feel this and what's the power of women if they don't do XYZ, or the machismo of the Latin community where a woman must, in order for a woman to be a great woman, she must be doing to serve, become a servant to her love, or whatever the case. It all comes from history, some type of history, some story, some ideology that was passed down that showed some truth. And so it happens today, right in our homes, when we're in front of Google and we're picturing in our minds, or we're celebrating a holiday, or we're thinking about making a big step in our lives, and we consult our history because, in our culture we do this, so it has to be done that way. You have to, you got to get married. You have to find somebody, you have to get married, you have to have a child, you have 2.5 children, and then you have to have a house with a picket fence. I mean, we hear these in books and we hear these in tales, but this is something that is surface. And then we think about our own lives and like, where are all the lies in my culture? And why am I still living these lies? Well, because I might believe them, or because I just do, I just go with it, right? And so I want to talk about real quick the two perspectives. And I don't know, I mean, this might be your thing, it might not be not your thing, but I've realized having this volunteer community, it has opened my eyes to other different cultures. And I've always been open-minded to learning about different cultures and why they do certain things, why do they believe in certain things, and their history that's just carried on and on until now, 2021. And I say to myself, I want to serve my community, myself, my family, my child, but I have to be open minded to understanding why people think the way they think. Is it because they woke up one day and say, this is how I'm going to think? Or is it something that's embedded in their cultures that this is the way they do it? And sometimes it's unexplainable. And so we have choices between the two perspectives. And either we can treat history as an impeccable fog, like, oh, I don't remember, right? It's a fog. Or we can figure out how to use history while accepting that each day might reveal more, and we may have to update our thinking. And I'm gonna say that again because, we see history, but every day, as everybody knows, history repeats itself in some way. And every day something is revealed that we have to update the way that we think, not because history happened and that's how it is. And I'm saying this to you in this podcast today is because you are not the only person on this earth. You're not the only person in your community. And having empathy, or having an emotional connection to wanting to help people, or wanting to find have a passion for impact, for change, you cannot just think about your bubble and your culture and that's it. And even myself, I always say to people when they're like, well, you Spanish, so you know Spanish, are you Mexican, are you this? And I'm like, no, I'm Dominican. And they're like, oh yeah, it's just like Mexican. Or I'm like, no, it's not. And there's nothing wrong with all the other cultures, but it's being knowledgeable that we are different. We might speak the same language, but we are different cultures. And there's always something new to learn about these cultures, that in one way, shape, or form, we are very connected and we all believe in probably the same crap. And so I'm going to challenge you guys today. The next time you come across someone, you read a quote, or you're reading something about Black Lives Matter, or you're reading something about a religion, or something that happened, or a bombing, or whatever in your current events, it's like, what is our new thinking? Are we learning something new? Or are we going to continue to train our minds to stay back in the 1912s and have these ideologies not to be open to the complexity of our own cultures, but the lies in our own cultures. And, finding truth in history is. I've been reading so much about this and this philosophy around it. And again, being in the volunteer travel community, you're being what's you're it's like the world, and I don't know anything about everything. I'm gonna just tell you right that I just know what I'm hearing from different cultures. And I everyone has their own experiences. I'm Dominican, but you talk to another Dominican and they're gonna have their own experiences. They're from another barrio, they're from another city, they're from another family, they're from another upbringing, and their perceptions of that history could be misconstrued. And so, like, finding the truth in history is about understanding that this truth is not absolute. It's just not. And truth is based on perspective. You got to think of it that way. If you ever have got into philosophy and the cultures of philosophy, or the cultures history within all different cultures, you always see that the writer is giving you their perspective of their truth. They're telling you how, and somebody else could have experienced that, and they're going to give you their perspective of their truth. And the perspective of the person who captured it and the person who's interpreting it could be completely different. And then think about it this way: then the perspective of the translation and the editors, el fulanito de tal, and primary sources. I mean, we don't get to be invisible observers of moments in the past. We don't. We're not lo moquito. We're not the mosquitoes, and that we can see exactly what happened. And the best we can do is keep our eyes open and keep our biases in check, because we're so biased about certain things. And I'm going to tell you a real true story real quick about this, because its perspective is something that it's all around us in our relationships and communication and love, and with our parents, with our children. It's all about perspective. And I'm learning so many different things, as I, again, being around so many different types of people in the volunteer community. When I say that, I mean like different nonprofits, or different things that I read, or shows that I watch. And so, we really don't get to be invisible of those moments in the past. And we don't get to go into their minds either. And so I'm going to tell you about keeping our biases in check. When I lived in Dominican Republic, I went to Dominican Republic and lived there as an adult. And I was like, ay, pero toda lindo. I mean, I always used to vacation because our parents made sure that we went there every year. I mean, multiple times. Like, we knew our country. I mean, we knew where we came from. Okay. And this is where you got to keep your biases in check, because history tells you one thing and people's perspective is another. And so as a child, you believe certain things based on, oh, well, Trujillo and this, and all these dictators and blah blah blah. You start to dig in and try and find your own truth and look at your own perspective of things, and you're like, well, dang, Dominican Republic is nothing but a whole bunch of racists, right? That's the first thing you come to your mind, because you're like, all of these events, it took me by surprise, in all these events. And I'm like, but why are we doing this to the Haitians? And why did the Spaniards come in? And I start going crazy in my mind. Mind you, I'm in my 20s, and I'm, finding things to do when I'm there, when I'm living there. And so I go to the university, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take a class. Why not? I mean, I can just come take a class and learn stuff. And so I go there and I sit there. And mind you, even before that, because I wanted to be a dual citizen. So I sit there and I'm listening to all this. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, does people think this is right? Like, you're telling me the history of what happened between Dominican Republic and Haiti, and you're telling me you think this is right. Does this even sound right? But people's perspectives, the storytellers have their perspectives. We all have our perspectives of how something went down. And so we can exaggerate, we can get our biases, and they can interlude And we can end up being, again, misconstrued everything from what it said. And you have to come up with your own conclusions, not based on the truth, but based on what you can pick from them, from all the lies. And then I started speaking certain things when people said, "Oh, you're from Dominican Republic," and da da da. And I'm like, hold on, I'm Dominican, and I'm actually very proud to be Dominican. I'm very proud to have parents that were born there. I'm very proud of my culture, the great side of my culture, because my culture is beautiful. Pero déjame decirte algo. Let get this straight. There's so many things that are not done well, that are not good, that are horrible. And so I was able to take my biases and my own perceptions of what I was told as a child to either brainwash me or to make me think that something was bad or something is this. And I had to figure that out my own. And we got to do that sometimes. We got to check our biases and we got to figure out that these sources that we're coming upon, everybody has their perspective. So that mosquito that was on the fly, that was there, the original place to witness, the stories have changed a million times in different ways. And how do we move past that? You know? And yeah, we can keep our eyes open, we can keep our biases checked. And what history can teach us is found that it's just not moments. It tries to describe it also that we have to choose to look at and how we look at to represent it and what we take from it and where are the signs and where are those factoids that relate to you. So I don't want to be super long in this podcast, and I hope you guys enjoy this podcast. And all I'm saying today is, try to dig through the lies of your own culture and look at your perception of everything, not just one thing. And as with Black Lives Matter and with immigration reform and so many different things, because we have a new president coming in now. It's like, let's check ourselves and let's be teachers of like learning. Let's always be students, not teachers, sorry. Let's always be students, because in order for us to combat social change and impact for change, we got to find the magic of trying to sit back and not always no, 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 but listen, listen, listen. Observe, observe, observe. Take things apart over and out. And someone else's perspective could be their truth, and yours can be another. And so I just want to leave you with today's podcast with that. And always with love and energy and light to everyone in this world, because you don't know what their perspectives have been. You don't know who they are. And I'm going to say this before we got to go for today's podcast, because, I've always grown up with some type of racism in my life because of my hair, the color of my skin. And now it's, of course, I've always had it. But now as an adult, it's like, I see it differently in the sense that, yes, it always impacted me, but now it's impacting me even more that I have a daughter. Like, it's not even about me anymore, right? It's about her. And and so I want to say this to you guys, like, there's going to be some horrible, nasty people in this world, and we can't change their perspectives. That's how that all we can do is be students of sharing knowledge and sharing these truths, because we can't change people. All we can do is just give people the resources and put it out there so that they can look at it from a new, fresh of eyes. All right, hasta la próxima. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And for everybody who messaged me last week about our podcast and our audio, I love you guys, because this is all about improving. So I hope today's audio was so much better. And if you want to be on the podcast, go ahead and email us at hello@deargodarewethereYet.com. Hasta la quince de la mañana. Ciao. Huepa! Thank you for tuning in. Show us your love and join the conversation on one of our redes sociales, social media. Leave a podcast review and be sure to tune in next week. ¿Y qué ahora? What's next? Check out our website and volunteer today. We have so many virtual volunteer opportunities, and remember, you can be a part of the change in a changing world. Hasta la próxima. Besos!